Thousands of families survived brutal winters with just one thing: wild berries no one touches today. Foragers once spent entire moons gathering them, drying them, guarding them like medicine. But then came the railroads, supermarkets, and silence. What happened to these sacred berries? And why have they vanished from every backyard, every plate, every memory? Let's uncover it. Buffalo berry. You'd never expect survival food to look like tiny red ornaments, but buffalo berry was exactly that. Tart, glossy, and packed with purpose. The Lakota and Cheyenne didn't just gather it, they relied on it. These berries were blended into pemmican, dried meat cakes that lasted entire winters. Without them, some families wouldn't have made it through. What made buffalo berry special? It fixed nitrogen in poor soil, meaning it healed land while feeding people. Plus, it grows in brutal drought and cold. Scientists at the University of Saskatchewan later confirmed it contains lycopene, carotenoids, and anti-inflammatory flavonoids, more than tomatoes. So why do most people today think pemmican came plain? The berry that kept warriors strong and elders nourished got pushed aside by shelf-stable sugar. And the next fruit looks like it belongs in a dessert, but it once marked entire seasons of celebration. Salmonberry, bright orange, soft as honeycomb, and sweet with a hint of tart. Salmonberries were once a prize of the Pacific Northwest. The Tlingit and Haida timed their foraging by salmonberry bloom. When the flowers opened, the salmon began their run. Everything in nature moved in rhythm. These berries weren't just snacks. They were dried into cakes, stored for later, and even used in first harvest ceremonies. Young girls in some villages offered the first berry to the ocean spirits. Modern studies show they're rich in vitamin A and C, with high water content and gentle digestive properties. But they rarely appear in markets. Why? Commercial crops crushed their wild habitat. Farms didn't want something that bruised easily. But traditional gatherers still return to secret coastal patches every year. Then there's a berry so deeply embedded in native medicine, even its bark carried stories of healing. Chokecherry, small, dark, and incredibly bitter raw. Chokecherries were never eaten for flavor. They were used for survival, strength, and ceremony. Almost every tribe across the plains and Rockies harvested them. The Blackfoot, Lakota, Arapaho all dried and pounded the fruit into cakes. But it wasn't just the berry. The bark treated colds. The pits held sedative oils. Even the wood was sacred in rites of passage. In 1916, USDA botanists noted chokecherry's tannin levels and immune-boosting qualities. Today, science backs what elders always knew. It's high in antioxidants and antiviral compounds. The name came from settlers who hated the taste. But native families saw it as life-giving. They say the bitterness meant it had power. And up next, there's a berry that once built entire summer economies, picked in massive gatherings that doubled as festivals and trade networks. Huckleberry. These deep purple berries once brought entire communities together. The Salish, Kootenai, and Nez Perce planned huge summer trips just to gather them. We're talking camps of dozens, sometimes hundreds, elders, kids, hunters, all moving up into the mountains once the snows melted. Huckleberries weren't just for eating. They were traded, gifted, even smoked with salmon. And they were protected. Families had their own patches, passed down like heirlooms. In the 1940s, commercial logging hit key huckleberry zones hard. Then came fire suppression and habitat loss. Today, wild huckleberries are rare and still don't grow well on farms. The USDA tried domesticating them for 60 years. No luck. So every berry you eat now? Still wild. And the next one is even more delicate. A fruit that can fall apart between your fingers but leaves a lasting mark on memory. Thimbleberry. Thimbleberries barely survive the picking. That's how soft they are. They look like raspberries, but bigger, flatter, and so fragile they collapse at a touch. You never find them in stores, but in the wild they were treasured. Ojibwe, Cree, and other northern tribes picked them along woodland edges and lakesides. The berries made quick snacks, but the real power came from the leaves. Steeped into teas, poultices, or crushed and applied to wounds. Thimbleberry leaves were medicine before medicine had a name. Early explorers wrote about them in journals, calling the fruit forest jelly. Sweet but gone in seconds. Today, foragers say if you find a patch, eat fast. Birds and bears usually get there first. Now imagine a berry so useful it showed up in trade networks, cook fires, and iron-rich meals, all at once. Serviceberry. Before roads and railroads, there were serviceberries. High in iron, fiber, and protein, these soft blue-purple berries were part of every food toolkit across the plains and prairies. The Blackfoot, Cree, and Métis used them in bannock, soups, pemmican, and preserves. Tribes dried them flat, sometimes pressed with roots and meat to trade with others hundreds of miles away. And they were reliable. The shrubs survive harsh winters, spring floods, droughts, even wildfires in some regions. Some family patches are over 100 years old. In Saskatchewan, early settlers called them Saskatoons and built a whole city around the berry's name. Modern labs say they rival blueberries in antioxidants, with 3 times the manganese. But most people today don't even recognize the name. Next is a berry with thorns so tough it drew blood, but the payoff made the scratches worth it. Wild gooseberry. This berry fights back. Wild gooseberry bushes grow low, scraggly, and full of thorns sharp enough to draw blood through gloves. But that didn't stop native harvesters. The Dakota, Osage, and Omaha picked these tart fruits carefully, knowing their value. Gooseberries made excellent teas, sauces, and fermented drinks. Mixed with wild meat, they helped preserve food longer thanks to their natural acidity. European settlers adopted them fast. By the 1800s, you could find gooseberry jam in frontier trading posts. But later, the USDA blamed them for carrying white pine blister rust. By 1911, several states banned gooseberries altogether. Decades passed before that science was reversed. Still, the berry stayed in the shadows, almost forgotten outside forager circles. From here, we go to a fruit so small you could lose it in your palm. Yet people once called it sacred. Wild strawberries grow smaller than your thumbnail, but the flavor punches through. Long before commercial strawberries filled supermarket shelves, eastern tribes like the Lenape, Haudenosaunee, and Cherokee picked these by the handful. They weren't just food. They were gifts. In Haudenosaunee culture, the strawberry is called the leader of berries. It's the first fruit of the season, tied to renewal, birth, and ceremony. Children collected them in woven birch bark baskets. Women dried them into cakes or added them to cornbread. Some stories say strawberries helped mend arguments. Sweet things meant to bring peace. Unlike hybrids, these wild varieties return each year without fuss. No chemicals, no pruning, just sunlight and patience. But now they've been pushed back by lawns, cities, and imported species. And the berry after this? It wasn't eaten for sweetness. It was burned for scent, used for wax, and saved for medicine. Northern bayberry. This berry doesn't taste good. That wasn't the point. For tribes like the Wampanoag and Lenape, the waxy blue-gray berries were prized for something else, their clean, sharp scent. They boiled them down to make aromatic candles, flavor meats, and treat skin problems. Bayberry was medicine and material. Colonial Americans picked up the habit too. By the 1700s, bayberry candles became a high-end export. They burned clean, smelled pleasant, and lasted longer than tallow. But they were costly. It took 15 pounds of berries for 1 pound of wax. Today, few people know these berries were once part of everyday life on the Atlantic coast. Now picture a berry so dark and potent, it made its way into cough syrups, wines, and immune potions, and both the flowers and fruit were harvested for healing. Elderberry carried real weight in native life. Tribes like the Cherokee, Creek, and Algonquin used the berries, flowers, and bark in dozens of remedies. People boiled the fruit into syrups for winter coughs, brewed it into immune-boosting teas, and mixed the blossoms into soothing poultices. These weren't guesses. They were skills passed down through generations. Early European settlers caught on fast. By the late 1700s, homemade elderberry wine sat on countless homestead shelves. It tasted sharp, earthy, and slightly sweet. Even today, lab studies show elderberries contain high levels of anthocyanins linked to immune support. Harvesting was a community job. Adults picked clusters, kids carried baskets, and elders dried the fruit in the sun for storage. But after the elderberry season ended, northern groups looked for a berry that survived tundra winds and icy storms, a berry that didn't soften or spoil. Crowberry. Crowberries thrive where almost nothing else grows. On Arctic tundra and subarctic mountains, Inuit, Dean, and Yupik families gathered these dark, nearly black berries across wide, windswept spaces. They taste mild, but their strength comes from durability. Unlike most fruits, crowberries stay firm through freezing nights and return year after year without care. Inuit hunters packed them with seal fat for long journeys. Dene people dried them into chewy cakes for winter. Even 19th century polar explorers relied on them when supplies ran low. Researchers today note their resilience. Crowberry shrubs spread slowly, hold soil in harsh climates, and resist extreme cold better than many modern crops. But once crowberry baskets were full, families turned to another plant, one rarely eaten for flavor, yet valued for cleansing the body, healing wounds, and calming the kidneys. Bearberry shows up in stories more than stews. Ojibwe, Cree, and Blackfeet communities gathered its small red berries, but they valued the leaves far more. They dried them for medicines used on kidney issues, infections, and chest discomfort. Some smoked the leaves ceremonially, blending them with local herbs. The berries themselves tasted mealy and slightly bitter, yet they mattered in survival seasons when food ran thin. Hunters grabbed handfuls for energy during long treks. Children mixed them with sweeter fruits when available. Bearberry's strength came from its persistence. The plant hugs the ground, resists drought, and spreads across rocky soil where few crops succeed. It's a quiet survivor, steady, dependable, and long-lived. And after bearberry, our trail leads to a fruit shaped like a tiny plum, but growing from a legume, a berry that confused settlers and fed entire plains communities. Ground plum, Jacquard milkvetch berry. At first glance, it looks like a grape growing on the prairie floor, but it's no grape, it's a legume. Known to botanists as Astragalus crassicarpus, this wild food was gathered by the Dakota, Pawnee, and other plains tribes long before farming came west. The berry-like pods grow low to the ground, ripening in early summer, and were eaten fresh during hunts or foraged in bulk during tribal movement. They taste mild, almost like a green pea with a touch of fruit. Nutritionally, they offered protein, fiber, and a valuable food during unpredictable seasons. The pods grow back each year without planting. But here's the twist. The plant is often mistaken for toxic relatives, which made tribal plant knowledge essential. One mistake could be fatal. That risk made it sacred. And now, that knowledge is nearly gone. Partridge berry tiny, red and hiding underfoot. This berry didn't grow in bunches, but in secrets. Michella repens grows as a ground cover, trailing under the forest shade across the eastern woodlands. The Iroquois, Miami, and Ojibwe knew where to find them. They'd mix the soft, slightly bitter berries with dried venison and fat, a forest version of pemmican. Medicinally, it was used as a women's health remedy. Elders brewed it into teas for pregnancy, cramps, and postpartum care. Every part of the plant held purpose. The twin flowers turn into one double-lobed fruit. That rare form earned it symbolic meaning, two becoming one. Colonial botanists tried transplanting it into European gardens, but outside its native forest floor, it refused to thrive. It needs that hidden world to survive. How many of our oldest foods only exist because someone remembered the path? Trailing blackberry. Before commercial blackberries took over, there was this. Rubus ursinus grew wild across the West Coast. Long before Oregon shipped its first berry, native people were collecting these smaller, sharper-tasting fruits in late summer. The fruit packs intense flavor into each bite. But the real prize is in its resilience. Unlike modern hybrids, trailing blackberry roots crawl across dry slopes and poor soils. The Chinook and cowlets dried them into cakes or ate them raw with roasted fish. They ripen unevenly, making them ideal for foraging rather than farming. You return daily, checking for what's ready. The harvest builds trust, not yield. When settlers arrived, they brought bigger, juicier European varieties. These quickly spread, outcompeting native blackberries. Today, you're more likely to see an invasive than this original. But in old patches near rail lines or tribal lands, they still grow. Who planted the berries growing behind your fence? The plants we forgot are calling us back, and the next story proves how fast we're losing them. Click the next video on your screen before it disappears.